Welcome to the Over the Hump Podcast, your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cottrell, Rachel Cottrell, and Keaton Dodd.
I'd like to welcome all of our listeners back to another episode of the Over the Hump podcast. I'm your host, Keaton Dodd, and today I've got the pleasure of bringing to y'all none other than Mr. John Coleman Locke. John may be a self-proclaimed hippie. In a sense, he talks about his holistic grass management practices and selecting cattle for functional efficiency. But just as importantly, you'll get to follow along in a journey as John discusses some of the influential animals that come out of the Locke division, how they've impacted the Brahman breed moving forward. But also, I think he gives you some beautiful insight into maybe some of the tougher questions you need to be asking yourself to manage your ranch profitably and to maintain some sustainability into the future. And so really, really excited for y'all to listen along as we talk with Mr. John Coleman Locke. Well, welcome back to the Over the Hump podcast. I'm your host, Keaton Dodd, and with me, we've got a special guest that I've been pretty excited about, looking forward to this. And so somebody that if you're a Brahman breeder or just a cattle enthusiast and spend quite a bit of time researching, a name you've probably come across, Mr. John Locke. John, if you would, we're just going to get into introducing yourself. I know a lot of people on here probably are very familiar with you and your family and some of y'all's accomplishments, but I want to kind of hear it from the horse's mouth. And so if you would, just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, Keaton. Really excited to be with you today. I appreciate the invitation. My name's John Locke. I am a member of the J.D. Hudgens family. My dad and I own and operate the Locke division of J.D. Hudgens. And I've been here on the ranch since I graduated from Texas Tech in 2001. And I'm just excited to get to talk to you today.
I got you, John. So you're currently back home at the ranch. What would you have done, I guess, in that time period directly after you graduated from Texas Tech? Did you immediately return home or did you go out and kind of spend some time doing some other things?
I came straight home. It was always kind of understood and sort of set up to where I was going to go off and kind of get the backup plan, get the education, have some fun at college, get some different experiences and come back and help my dad continue to work on what he and my grandfather had built here. And so, I got straight into it when I got home. I have kind of an interesting story. We were running probably 300 cows and on about 1,200 acres and farming about 500 acres. And not long after I got home, I guess 7 or 8 years, we kind of went through a succession event and we ended up with about 120 cows when it was all said and done, and about 473 acres. And so we had to make some real changes. That's for two families. That's not a whole lot to make a living with in any business, really, especially the cattle business. But so, we've kind of been in a state of change in the last 10 or 12 years as a result of that. But it's been a lot of fun. We've learned a lot, and we're continuing to change and grow. And so luckily, I've got a great dad that's been supportive through everything and been a good mentor and example to me. And so we're just, like I said, we're continuing to change things and grow and making it happen.
I get you. I always enjoy the opportunity to get to visit with your dad. One of the wiser and kinder men that we get to be around in the Brahman breed. And so kicking it to the Brahman breed, I guess, tell us a little bit about obviously we know your family's history in the Brahmin breed, but I think Rachel had mentioned that maybe you were president of the AGABA, and tell me some of your involvement early on and kind of where we are now, even with the Brahmin breed.
Yeah, so I guess I started the leadership stuff at a young age, and I made a ton of friends through AJBA and TJBA, and really had fun, going to summer shows. We weren't big into showing when I was young, but just the people part of it was so much fun for us. And somehow found myself in leadership role, ended up as AJBA president, served as an AJBA director and officer for several years. And I was pretty close to getting out of tech, and I got a call one day from Hungerford, and they were sitting around the office and nominating directors. And I was a designated representative for our division, and they asked if I'd be willing to serve on the board. And I said, of course, I would. Sounds like fun. Little did I know, it's not a whole lot of fun. But I got nominated and elected to the ABBA board. Served on the board, I think for I'd have to go back and look, but like 23 years or something. And I was on the executive committee for probably 8 or 10 years, and stepped out, oh, 4 or 5 years ago, and hadn't really been involved in the political side of things. I guess, to be honest with you, probably got a little bit burned out with it, but it was a long time, and I really enjoyed it. We got to do a lot of fun things, and got to experience what it was like to be involved in that leadership, and had a lot of neat activities, and did some things that I felt like really sort of took the breed to new heights during that time period.
Absolutely. I know when you're volunteering your time, there's always the positives and the negatives, but hopefully that was a positive experience for you getting to work alongside other breeders and people in this industry. One thing I thought that was interesting in some of the little bit of time that we've got to talk together, because by no means does anybody associate uh, John Locke with the show cattle guy, but at one point in time, you did kind of manage the Hudgens show string and even haul those cattle around. Would you tell us about that a little bit and what you thought of doing that?
Yeah, those are good times. It's kind of interesting because, like you said, a lot these days, a lot of people probably think of me as the anti-show guy, and for good reason in some ways. But yeah, I somehow, I don't remember if I nominated myself or if I got nominated. We had been through a few herdsmen over the years at the ranch, and Porfirio, of course, is our herdsman now, and he's been here for, I think, right around 40 years. He can pretty much do everything with the show cattle, and has done a great job of managing them. But we sort of just needed somebody to go along and pitch in, but also sort of be the go-to guy if we had any issues on the road. And I think I did that for about 10 years. I went to every major show, and got a little bit of stick time. I still get picked on anytime someone sees a show ring on my in my hand, or I'm not the best showman, never claimed to be, but I had the fortune of showing many champions, and have a lot of great stories and a lot of great friendships. Just stepped away from that, and sort of turned the page, and to a different chapter when I got through with that. But it was a blast.
I got you. Well, if we can totally edit this story out if you don't want to tell it, but if you do have the time, and I'm not even sure exactly how the story goes and if it was Woodman or Woodson, but Dr. Sanders has told it before, where the international champion bull didn't make it with y'all to one of these shows. And y'all actually had to send a second trailer to go get him. So could you tell us that story, John? Because that's one of my favorite Brahmin stories.
Yeah, that's a classic. I just sitting here grinning thinking about it. That was that was so much fun back in those days, because we would quite often get the Australian Edgar Hudgens scholarship recipients to come along with us to shows, and made great friendships with so many of those folks. And we would take them to most of the shows, because the Australians, they work like Turks, and they're just great people to be around and a lot of fun. And I'm pretty sure that it was Colin Johnson. It was so long ago, but Colin Johnson was over, and I was fresh out of college, and was just starting to go with the cattle. And we loaded up that morning. We'd always load at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we loaded that morning, and I said, "Hey, Porfirio," I said, "what about Woodman?" I said, "Woodman's not going with us?" And he said, "No, they said they didn't want to take him." And I don't want to pick on him, but sometimes Porfirio's a little bit hard to understand. But it was a very definite no. Woodman's not going to the show. And so we were going to Dallas, and of course we got there early that morning at 6 o'clock or whatever, and got unloaded, and we were getting settled. And I think it was around noon, and Bob Hudgens called me to check in and see how everything was going and make sure we'd got settled. And we were sitting there on the phone visiting, and he said, "Hey," he said, and this was back in the day before Hudgens dehorned their bulls. He said, "Hey, you might tell that Australian boy that he needs to be careful around that Woodman bull. He kind of likes to sling his head, and those Aussies, they're not used to cattle with horns, and I sure would hate to see him get hurt." And about 50 thoughts ran through my mind in half a second. And I said, "Alrighty, I'll sure tell him, Bob. We'll talk to you later." And I hung up and walked straight over to Porfirio. And I probably still had a Motorola StarTAC at that time. And I pulled my phone out and pulled Bob's number up. I said, "Hey, Porfirio, why don't you call Bob real quick and tell him that you left his prized bull at home?" And he looked at me like, "What?" I said, "Bob thinks Woodman is here." And he had this look come over his face like, "Uh-oh." So he did. He called Bob, and he was throwing hand gestures and kind of stomping around and looking sad, and you know wandering around. And he came over and handed the phone back to me, and Bob said, "Well, what time do they have to be there?" And I said, "I think we've got to be checked in by 5 this evening or something." And so Harry Sadler was doing a lot of goosenecking for us back in those days, and Bob called Harry, and Harry was hooked up and fueled up and loaded probably in a half hour, and jumped Woodman on the trailer, hauled him to the state fair, and we met him that evening and got him unloaded and settled in, and he went on to be national champion. So it was the national championship that almost wasn't, and sure makes for a good story.
That is a funny, funny story. Like I said, that's one of my very, very favorite ones. And that's going to pivot us actually into talking. Wanted to spend some time just discussing some of the Lock Division cattle specifically that stand out to you. Or if you had to make maybe a Mount Rushmore of Lock Division cattle, what are some of the more influential animals that you've gotten the pleasure to work with, but even more your dad, your grandfather, some of those animals that kind of set the foundation? I'll tell you, our herd has as much lock influence is any herd of cattle that we've kind of sourced genetics from. And so, if you could just tell us about some of those older animals that you think deserve a little pointing out.
Sure. I guess I can kind of start at the beginning and work towards the end, or towards the middle, I guess you could say, because it's not the end. But um, we've always been priding ourselves on natural production, and so fertility. One of the challenges of the Brahman breed is fertility. And to me, you can't select for any trait. You can't put selection pressure on any trait if you don't have fertility, because you've got to have a big base to choose from, and you got to have that fertility. I think the gift of the Brahman breed is to be able to produce beef in harsh environments, and they need to be able to do it naturally. And so we've always tended to manage in that way. So we heavily focused on fertile animals, animals that would milk, and animals that were capable of producing in sort of their natural environment, but a harsh environment. So back in the day, I'd say one of the first animals that had a huge impact on our breed was probably the 433 Marone bull, that my grandfather had purchased from Mr. Marone, and that led to the 204 over a two bull, and then the 310 over two bull super calc, and they were just kind of sort of stalwarts of their time, not in show ring, not at all in producing champions, but just producing exceptional functional females that were um really really superstars, I guess, as far as in the pasture, and very consistent. And so we kind of built our base, I would say, on those types of genetics. And then, there was bulls like the Sarasota bull that same thing, just great producers. And we sort of moved our program at one point and started using more heavy influence of some of the Hudgens division genetics. And once we started using the Madison bull and those types of animals, that was a bit of an outcross to what we had built with just these fertile functional genetics, and sort of took us to a little bit of a different level as far as phenotype. And so, um, we had so many sons of Liberty that we used there for a while, and Madison sons, and probably one of the great unknown bulls that some of your listeners might find interesting that we really built our program on, that not a whole lot of people know because we didn't promote him, we didn't collect him. But there was a bull named Welu, and he was out of our best Sarasota female, 843 over a 2, and his number is 479 over a 3. And that Welu bull, we've still got a couple of females today, and one really prominent donor of ours. And everywhere you look in our pedigrees that have done really well, you're gonna see Welu in there. And so he was a Madison Sarasota cross. Um, and I'm probably boring everybody at this point, but you can carry a lot of those genetics forward to today.
Brahman beef is the next big thing in the meat industry. Known for its great flavor along with heart-healthy benefits, Brahman beef is taking the country by storm. Brahman Country Beef features great-tasting, heart-healthy beef raised by BRC Ranch. We ship nationwide, with everything from premium steaks to briskets, ground beef, and even hard-to-find cuts like tri-tip, picanha, oxtails, and the elusive Brahman hump. Visit BrahmanCountryBeef.com and start your order today.
My next topic, what we want to talk about, some of the very influential animals in the Locke division. Obviously, our herd here at BRC maybe is more influenced by Locke division cattle than any other source that we've used to source genetics. So, talk us from the beginning, some of the big influential bulls and females that kind of made y'all's herd what they are today.
Sure. So it's fun to talk about this stuff and kind of think back to the past. I'd say that my dad, my grandfather, and probably heavily influenced by Walter Hudgens and Edgar Hudgens, had a huge focus on fertility and just natural production. I think that the legacy of JD Hudgens of our division and the legacy of the Brahman breed is one that's rooted in uh, ranching and challenging environments. And to do that, you've got to have a fertile, functional animal. And so that's always been our focus. I'd say going back sort of towards the beginning, when we started experimenting with some different genetics and trying to improve our breeding program, one of the bulls that really stands out would probably be the 433 Marone bull. He was a bull that was extremely high in milk and extremely fertile. Dr. Marone uh, used a lot of university research and developing a herd of cattle that was very productive. And that bull started to change our program for the better. He sired the 204 over 2 and 310 over 2 super calc bulls, which were bulls that were really well known in their day, never for show ring, never for, siren champions, but for just superior performance-based genetics. They were just super, super impactful on the breed and in our herd. Everybody knows the Super Calc Bull and remembers that iconic picture of him with his tilted horns and just big-bodied, capacious kind of animal that his offspring performed just like he looked. And then, you know, it, we used those sorts of genetics a lot. Led us to the Sarasota Bull 880 over a 2, some of the most productive females we've probably ever had. And I would say that the next thing that had a really big impact on our breeding program was when we started experimenting more with some of the Hudgens division genetics. And we used bulls like Liberty and Madison. We brought in a little bit different phenotype, maybe a little bit different kind of performance, and crossed them with our practical genetics. And we ended up with multiple Sons of Liberty that we used. The Brandon bull that was very impactful. The Bertram bull, the Bevan bull, who's a sire of Astro, and we just went through a period there where it was just a super good outcross using those genetics. Mr. Deeds and using Prescott. We probably used Prescott as successfully as anyone in the world, and really had a big impact on our herd. Um, and of course, that led to, when we used Madison quite a bit, one of the most influential bulls that we've had in our program, that would be one of the most little known bulls, was a bull named Welu, 479 over a 3. We never collected him, but he bred till he was 12 years old, sired a tremendous number of animals for us, and mainly females that we retained, and they were just the right kind. He was sired by Madison, so we had that Madison Sarasota cross, and it was kind of the perfect combination of performance and fertility and functionality. And even today, we've still got one donor that we use. It's 25 years later, that is really performing for us. A cow named Edwina, that's sired by Welu, and then the Jackie cow was a cow that had as big of an impact on our herd as any. She was a Welu daughter as well. And then she went back to Roebuck, who was out of Lady Ellis. And to be honest with you, Keaton, that's where I've been trying to get with this whole conversation, because the Lady Ellis cow was probably,
Yeah, John.
yeah, she she's probably one of the most important cows.
No, I was going to say, tell me a little bit about Lady Ellis.
Yeah, and it's kind of neat to bring her up at this point, because the Jackie cow's been super influential in being sired or having Roebuck in her pedigree. A lot of this Elmo Jackie stuff that we've been doing, it's a double shot of Ellis in it, and that kind of goes all the way back to Edgar and Walter and line breeding, and um, but Lady Ellis, she was just one of those cows that you could breed anything and she would produce. And maybe what a lot of people don't know about her is fertility wise. I mean, she never missed. She's born in 1986, calved as a 3-year-old, and just never missed. And every calf she had was high quality. And of course, we seem to always come at things in a roundabout way, and we ended up kind of backing into using her in our gray program more through breeding some reds. And that it was a time when I got home from school and we were kind of trying different things. And I won't tell the whole story, but Barry Bryant gave my dad some He's Got the Look semen, and we decided to use it on that cow because she was so special. And we raised Jefferson and Windsor and Derringer, and this slew of great red bulls that were very impactful. And just kind of by chance, that led us to using Prescott, who had a huge impact on our breeding program, um, and ended up with the Mr. Deeds bull, and that was so great going back to gray on that cow that we ended up with using Lawford, just like I said, sort of by chance. All the stars aligned, and then that gave us Elmo, and I think that's probably, that sounds a little arrogant to say, but I think Elmo's probably been one of the most influential bulls in the breed around the world in the last 10 years, and that's not to discount the Madisons and the Liberties and all of that, because one thing just leads to another. And so, but when you look at the breed, look at y'all's program, you look at many other prominent programs, Elmo's had a huge impact, and he's probably one of my top picks, one of my favorite bulls of all time, really.
Elmo's done a huge deal for our program. I'd say at least 50% of our females go back to Elmo, and probably 75% of our herd sires go back to Elmo. So, no argue his influence on our herd, but his influence on the breed is going to go down is probably a top 5 Mount Rushmore type of bull. I think when you look back on him and his impact on the Brahman breed. Tell me, when you first saw Elmo, did you know there was something special there? Could you just tell from the very beginning that he was going to be a kind of the big deal, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit slow, to be honest with you, Keaton, and everybody that knows me knows that. Kind of casual, I guess you'd say. And it's kind of funny because I was pretty high on him, but I got a phone call from Bob one day. It's kind of funny how much this goes back to a phone call from Bob Hudgens, and we had Elmo and his mama up on this place that we had that we ran our recip cows on, and kind of out of sight, out of mind. And they, they got seen every other day. And Bob had another young Australian, and they were riding around just kind of killing time looking at cattle. And he had gone up there and saw him, and he called me and he said, "You better get that bull to the show barn." And I was like, okay. And so we took him to the show barn, and I don't remember what month that would have been. I mean, he was born in October, and so we probably took him to the show barn in March, and had him ready for the kickoff, and he was pretty green. And Randy Perry judged kickoff, and that's when I was going with the show cattle, and I took that bull in the ring. And I remember when I went in for class, and I was just sitting there looking at him and studying him while I was sticking him, and I could see his loin and he's famous for that stifle bulge, and just how impressive he was, how gentle he was, how good footed he was, just perfect structure. And I remember thinking, man, this is the deal right here. If everyone could be like this, we'd have it made. And I just was so, excited about him. Of course, he won his class, came back, won his division, and he won reserve his very first time out. And, from a program like the Lock Division program that wasn't really into show cattle or known for show cattle, I knew from that point that he was the one, and he just kept getting better. I mean, it was like every day he got better, and so much fun to raise a bull like that.
That is pretty cool. I would tell you, I think Elmo's had a gigantic impact on our program, but the Lock Division animal that maybe has had more impact on our program is a cow 347 over 3.
Yeah.
We call her Granny,
Yeah.
Janessa.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that cow? Do you remember her specifically from the beginning, too? I know she'd be probably, 30 years old by now.
Yeah.
But that cow is both 160 and capped in our two main sire lines. She'd be the matriarch cow, and we've got Janessa. Some animals we've been raising now, she shows up 3 times in their pedigree. So tell us about Janessa a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She was a funny cow because she was a different cow to deal with. The 440 bull, we used a Ferguson's, and he was the same way. Um, this is not a knock on them at all, because we all know how Brahman cattle are, and we know how they have different personalities. It was the easiest bull to handle, one of the smartest bulls that was around, and I have probably never, well, with one exception, I've probably never patched so much fence as I patched behind that bull, because he was a breeder. He was always in the next pasture. He was always whooping up on another bull, and he was so frustrating to have him breed on the place. And so I think we used 440 one season. The calves were so great that we decided to try to lease him back or trade for him from Ferguson's the next season. And I think after about a month, I said, you just gotta come get him, or I'm gonna bring him back, because I'm not dealing with him. And he was easy to handle, but he was a go getter. And so it's funny when I look back at that, we might have had 5 calf crops of 440 calves, and she was one of the only ones that we got. So, but I remember her. She was such a striking, stunning cow, like just phenotype wise. She was, made long as a freight train, and sound, and real high performing cow, high milking cow. And it was sort of uh, interesting and funny that you guys ended up with her, because Rachel and Brandon bought a group of cows, and I sort of threw her in on the deal as kind of a favor, I guess, because they had some really good production from her. And so it's weird how everything works out, and she has had a tremendous impact. But she was a really nice cow that I wish I'd had a lot more just like her.
Yeah, no, she's done a huge, huge job in our program. I talked about, we've got animals now that we're breeding the third shot of Janessa into those things, and talk about just maternal cattle that work, cattle that milk. And so we're very proud that we had the opportunity to kind of share in her legacy with you guys. And so great, great cow. We'll kick it in another different direction. I want to know what's going on in the Lock Division now. What's your focus? What's your goals? What gets you fired up to raise cattle in today's business?
You know, that's a great question, Keaton. And I don't want to get weird on you, but it's funny. You're talking to a guy that's sort of middle age. I know you're one of those young bucks, and that question that you ask, it gets more and more important all the time. I've got kids, three beautiful daughters, and looking out towards the future. Never seen more importance on knowing yourself and learning about yourself and which direction you want to go and what the legacy is that you want to leave. And so what really gets me fired up is, and everybody that knows me knows I got a little bit of hippie in me, but this influence on not just the land and not just the animals, but on the people around us is something uh, that gets me fired up. We're we've been a little bit different since we've had this big change in this successional event, kind of gone in a little bit different direction than most of your typical Brahmin breeders, not pursuing the show ring, not pursuing as much IVF and embryo production. We are still rooted in natural production, cows raising their own calves, building a base around that so that we can truly identify the ones that perform and are fertile and can do it in the real world. It's not as sexy, it's not as fun, it doesn't have the wow factor to it that some of the other stuff does. But that's as much as that other stuff we've done. We've just continued to learn that this is who we are, and so we continue down that path, and then we're continuing to seek out opportunities, and we found some to work with other ranchers and kind of grow our footprint as far as helping improve the land and improve businesses and operations. And so we're looking at some new opportunities to grow our business and focus on growth versus focusing on a small number of animals. And so that's kind of what gets me fired up in a nutshell.
Yeah, they say nobody grows grass like John Locke, and I tell you, the first time I went out to y'all's place, I was blown away. I've never seen anything like that, and how intricate y'all's program is and your rotational grazing system. Could you just run us through kind of where that idea came to you from? Was this a process that took years to build, or did you just wake up one day and say, "I'm going to do this different. We're going to make this work," and just go from there? Tell us about your kind of your grazing system.
Sure. Yeah, and I think maybe for whatever reason I've been a little bit of a nonconformist my whole life. I sort of insist on doing things differently, and caveat that with even if they don't always make sense, it's just for the sake of being different. But when you wake up one day and you've got less than half of your cow herd and you've got 25% of your land base, the number one thing is that you can't bury your head in the sand and just hope that things change, and you got to get creative and you got to start to look at what's important. And so trying to do more with less was the initiation of changing our operation and the things like the grazing program, strategic partnerships, and those sorts of things. So that was the basis of it. Was, well, we've got a smaller land base. Let's utilize what we have a little bit better at a time when labor is going out of sight, at a time when input costs are going out of sight, and at a time when maybe some of the practices that we've been doing for the last 50 or 60 years truly might not be the best for soil health and biology and all those sorts of things. So that was kind of, not to get too weird on you, but that was kind of the basis of changing and going in a different direction. And then we've tried a lot of different things. You asked specifically about the grazing program. The basis of that is just allowing plants to recover after they've been grazed. So we focus on as short a graze period as possible, with appropriate recovery of those plants, so that when you graze them the next time, the roots are better, the leaves are better, the soil biology and all that stuff's better. And it really cuts down on your input cost. It kind of streamlines your labor. We focus on trying to put herds together, and it's a real challenge managing seed stock cattle like that. But try to put things together in a way that makes sense, so that we can focus our management and do the best for the herd and the soil and plants and people as well.
Yeah, looking at it just as somebody on the outside, it's fascinating to think that all of that is something that you built and you designed. But could you give just kind of a brief? We're not going to get to see a picture of it, but just a brief overview of how your setup is. It's hot wire, kind of a pie deal. Tell us kind of how you go through that.
Yeah, so we've got a I get picked on for this all the time, so that's why I hesitate. We've got a series of paddocks. For all you conventional people that are laughing at me right now, I guess you would call them small pastures. But in Australia, I've seen paddocks that are 100,000 acres. So, um, but we've got a series.
100. Okay.
I maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit there. I've seen 5,000 acre paddocks for sure. So maybe 20,000 acre paddocks. But
No, that's
yeah,
insane. Like that.
yeah, they call a pasture a paddock over there. So, but we call them paddocks, and they're small, 5 to 6 to 10 acre paddocks, and we move the cows frequently through them. It's all single wire, hot wire. That's probably about hip high, and post every 125 feet. Quite a bit of infrastructure, but it's low cost infrastructure. We have underground water pipes that serve every 4 paddocks, and a portable water trough that we move around as we move the cows. And when people hear that or they see it, they think, "Oh my gosh, this looks like a lot of work." It's not a lot of work. It's just different work. Back in the day when we had 15 pastures to check and 15 water troughs, 15 herds of cows, and 15 mineral feeders and all that, that was a lot of work too. Um, it's just different work, and at the end of the day, we like it. That's the most important thing. Whatever you do in ranching, you need to like it, and if you like it, then everything else will figure itself out.
Well, I'll tell you the stress load that it has to probably take off of you just to look out in your pastures, even in a drought, and know that you've got grass and forage for your cattle. I'm sure anybody that's poking fun hasn't been out and seen how much grass you guys have put together. So I'm impressed with the program, obviously.
Well, I appreciate that, and you're spot on that. Everybody, their typical comment is yeah, this is all well and good until it doesn't rain. And the thing about that is we've had 2 years of some of the most extreme drought that we've had. 2011 was rough. Our place, 2022 and 2023 would rival and maybe beat 2011. There's something about our area there. We don't get a whole lot of rain, and that's actually when those types of operations shine, is when things get tough. We actually had a 90% breed up this summer. We had 100% of our heifers nursing their first calves breed up, and that was with no supplementation in the way of grain or hay or anything like that. So pretty proud of results like that. And yeah, like I said, we enjoy it. It's fun, and believe it or not, it's actually pretty practical. And you mentioned drought. It's been really nice during drought to have some uh, less stressful nights and not be feeding hay and those sorts of things.
Wow, that's probably as powerful as a testimonial as somebody could have for what you're doing. So you went 100% breed up on your first calf heifers. That's fantastic. Not only just any breed of cattle, but if you've been around Brahman cattle, that's a statistic that's probably higher than just about anybody's in the world. So that's very, very impressive. You had mentioned, John, just a
Yeah.
little while ago, Australia and some of the time that you've spent in Australia. uh, did you live over there? Was there an extended period of time where you stayed in Australia, and could you tell me some of that?
Well, if you ask my wife and if you ask select people in Australia, they'd say, yeah, John lived over here. But I didn't actually live over there. I just visited relatively frequently for a period of several years. I looked at my passport a while back. I think I've made 7 trips. It feels like a second home. I haven't been there in quite some time, and I really miss it. I really miss the people. Love Australia and love the practical nature of most people, most ranches there. I learned a lot about breeding cattle and breeding functional cattle from Australians. Namely, one of my mentors in breeding, Brett Nobbs, who partnered on Elmo with us and had a huge impact on our breeding program. He's probably one of the best breeders and best cattlemen that I've ever been around. And so yeah, it's like I said, it feels like a second home. And I just if a lot of people look at what the Australians look at and they don't quite understand it, but I feel like I've spent enough time there to where I get where they're coming from with most of their selection pressure and their tools, and they're in a pretty tough environment as far as measured by most metrics. And so early on in my career, I thought we better probably learn something from these guys, and so I feel like they've had as a whole and as a country, they've had a big impact on me.
No, that's interesting. I also really really enjoy getting to visit with Australian groups, and I think each country or continent that kind of comes through during Houston time has their unique reasons why I really enjoy visiting with them. But I think one of my favorite things talking to people who've been to Australia, and almost every person I know from America that spent some time in Australia has had some kind of encounter with wildlife in Australia. Do you have any stories of any kind of venomous snakes or crazy experiences while you were over there?
I'll tell a less exciting story about wildlife in Australia. Um, you haven't lived until you have been just walking casually across the yard or from one barn to another, and you get attacked by a crow. Um, when I first went over there, you would see these kids riding bicycles, these young kids, and they would put a ice cream carton on their head, and this I'm not making this up, and they would draw a face on the ice cream carton, and they would put that face on like the back of the head, facing backwards. I was like, "What is this all about? This is the craziest thing." They said, "Oh, that's to keep the crows off of them." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Well, one day I was there during walking across the yard, from the house to the barn, and these silly crows just came out of nowhere and tried to attack me. And so they come from behind. And so if you've got an ice cream carton on your head with a face drawn on the back of it, they think that's your real eyes, and they're confused and they don't know which side to attack, so they're less likely to attack you. But that's probably the worst encounter with wildlife. I've seen plenty of kangaroos and um, all kinds of things. Been around some brown snakes and big ugly spiders, and there's probably more things that will kill you in Australia than on any other continent in the world. And that's that's probably the only downside I can think from going over there.
No, I've always spoke with people who've spent time in Australia, and it'd be whether they were playing with a brown snake in the yard, not knowing how harmful they were, or crocodiles or whatever. But that part fascinates me, and that's what fascinates me about Australia. But
Yeah,
you're right; those people really do have a practical approach to ranching that maybe we should all embrace just a little bit. But with this, speaking of practical approach to ranching, I'm from kind of the same school of thought as you. Is if it doesn't increase your bottom line or make your job easier to go through daily, then it probably isn't a practical way about breeding cattle or a practical application, whether it's your grazing program or your nutrition. So, ranching for profit. I want you to just kind of give us the basics of ranching for profit, how you fit into that, and how we could become a part of it if we wanted to.
sure. Yeah. So when our program changed in 2010 going into 2011, and we were looking for some answers on kind of how to do things differently and be better and be more profitable. I was at a program and Dave Pratt spoke, and he was used to be the owner of Ranch Management Consultants that taught the Ranching for Profit School. And I sat there and thought, man, I'm 35 years old. How have I never heard some of this stuff? He was asking some really hard questions that really got me to thinking. So I went to the school that year, and it's had a really profound impact on the way that we think and the way that we operate. Um, and joined their Executive Link program, which is a kind of a peer review business development program. Was a part of that for several years. And when a friend of mine, Dallas Mount, bought the company towards the end of 2018, he called me up and asked me if I would consider being an instructor. So I've done that for a few years now. It's a lot of fun. So what RMC does is they teach a week-long school called Ranching for Profit, and it's based off the premise that many ranchers are rich on the balance sheet and broke at the bank. We might be operating millions and millions of dollars in assets and having a hard time buying groceries, and that's just a fact of ranching in North America. And then I'll take it a step further. It's the premise of the course is that maybe we're operating with some of the wrong paradigms. Our paradigms, our thoughts of what's normal in ranching and how we need to operate. If it's not leading to profit, more freedom, a better life, um, maybe we've got some things wrong. So it's a course about asking bigger questions and trying to determine where you want to go, identifying that, and then building a plan on how to get there. So it's been a lot of fun to be a part of. Going back to the people thing, get to help a lot of people, and it's very rewarding, very fulfilling. I've realized from my experience with it that every problem is a people problem, and people are so important, such an important piece of the equation, and I've kind of gravitated more towards that, dealing with people, helping people create visions, helping people deal with relationship issues and those sorts of things. And so if you want to know more about it, ranchmanagement.com is the website. There's plenty of testimonials. There's plenty of information on there. There's a schedule of schools, and they have them pretty much all over North America. There's even a Ranching for Profit Mexico now that's owned by a gentleman from Mexico.
Perfect, John. Well, I tell you, after listening to you talk, and me being a person who comes from a similar mindset of, like you said, if it doesn't make your life more enjoyable, and add a little bit more to your bank account, then there's really no purpose in doing this. And you talked about your kind of no nonsense approach to raising cattle, to fertility, longevity, uh, kind of selecting the real world cow. And so if someone wanted to sit down and talk with you, wanted to maybe implement some long division cattle in their program, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What's the best way to go about looking at some of those cattle?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Keaton. The best way is to shoot me a text or an email. It's hard managing phone calls and whatnot, and so typically when people text me, I'll do my best to get back with them in a timely manner. Email also is great. My email is John C, as in Coleman, Locke, Locke at hotmail.com. And if people want to text me, I guess I'll give my number out. If you don't want that on there, you can edit it out, but my number is 979-533-3162. Also, sort of active on Facebook. My Facebook name is John Coleman Locke, and I'm pretty easy to find. I've got JD Hudgens tags and lots of pictures of Brahmins and kids and that sort of stuff. So anyone wants to visit, definitely reach out to me, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, sort of active. I always like come All American time and state show. Some of the banter that you and some of the folks your age, like Rachel, that have been involved in Brahmin this whole time. I really enjoy kind of some of y'all's Facebook trash talk. And so before we wrap up, John, we're going to get into a couple of questions. I'm going to ask you two questions that we've asked every guest, and I've had to go through them. But before we get into that, I just want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything that you maybe had plans of talking about before you got in here that we haven't got to, or something that I've missed, or just something you think that's important that you'd like to tell the Brahmin audience before we get into kind of wrapping things up?
I'm not sure there is, Keaton. I would say that I would encourage people to not just look at what they're doing, but look at why they're doing it. And there's a lot of different approaches at this Brahman deal, a lot of different ways to go about it. Figure out what your reasoning for it is, and if you can identify that, then you can identify what you truly want, kind of what your vision is for your business, And that's going to make it so much more fun, so much more enjoyable if you get clarity on those sorts of things, and even if you write them down. um, and then find people that align with that. You know, if I tell people all the time, if you want to show calf, I've got plenty of people you can call. That's not really our deal. But if you want some really practical cattle that have got generations of fertility built into them, and predictability and disposition and all that stuff that maybe is a little more important to the commercial cattleman, then align yourself with the people like us that are into that sort of thing. So just go forward with purpose and clarity of direction, and you can have a lot of fun with these cattle and a lot of fun breeding them.
If you could give any piece of advice to young John Locke, what would you tell him as a 21-year-old coming out of Texas Tech to better prepare you for what ranching was about to throw your way?
Oh man, I'd say that's a great um, that's a great question, and it would go back to just what I said. Just, we're taught from a young age that we can't have everything we want. Um, Figure out what you want, identify it, and go for it. Uh, Things when you focus on something, one step always leads to the next, and it seems like God rolls the path out in front of you. But when you're hesitant, and when you sit back and you're not proactive, you get stagnant. And so I've probably wasted a lot of time and a lot of years, um, not being proactive enough. And then the other thing would just be to embrace people. This is going to sound corny, but love's the most powerful force in the world. And in ranching, we kind of tend to get in our silos and hunker down and say we're doing this because we don't like people. It's all about people. And so I would say that we need to learn to better embrace that.
I like that. I think that's good advice. Everybody probably needs to take the time and slow down and just make sure that we're good people, good neighbors, and good family members first. All right, John, we'll get into these two questions as we get ready to wrap up, and you can plead the fifth if you must. But so far, nobody has pled the fifth on these questions, and we've had them all answered. I'll tell you. Uh, One of my answers is actually an animal that you raised, so that's kind of fun that we get to talk about it. But first question is, what's your pet peeve in Brahman right now? If you could just the thing that irks you, makes your skin crawl, what would you say is your biggest pet peeve in Brahman right now?
Oh man. Wow.
There might be a few of
No. um you know I think that my biggest pet peeve is just people wanting to get away from the practical stuff. We tend to think that a lot of that's a given. That, well, all this stuff's taken care of. The good feet, the good fertility, the good udders, those sorts of things. We go somewhere and we just work off the assumption that, oh, all that stuff's taken care of and it's perfect. If you don't have that at the baseline, then to me, none of the rest of it matters. And there's a lot of things that we select for. I say we. I'm talking about cattle breeders in general, not just Brahmins, that aren't really rooted in practicality. Form should follow function. So when we start looking at things like flat hips, and that leads to pointy tail heads and shallower twists and poor leg geometry, and I think we need to accentuate these cattle in the ways that God made them and the reasons for them. So I would say impractical selection based off of what we think looks pretty phenotypically is one of my biggest pet peeves.
No, that's a good answer. We haven't had anybody answer that question in that way, but you're right. Selection on traits that are straight antagonists towards that animal's function, like leveling their hip up to the point where they don't drain after calving. It's going to affect their hock, their pasture, and the way they use all that. So I agree 100%. It's like I was judging a show the other day, and I told those exhibitors, to be honest, I don't think that any of these bulls are acceptable in the length and the angle of their sheath. And it'd be like if you bought a brand new Duramax Chevrolet, but you didn't get the keys. You're just kind of missing a key part there. So
Yeah.
I agree a lot with what you had to say. The last one, and I'll tell you, was my favorite. Actually, ended up being a cow you raised, Janessa. That was my choice for favorite Brahmin all time. But what would John Locke's answer towards the favorite, and this is just personal, your favorite Brahmin of all time? It doesn't have to be a Hudgens, doesn't have to be Locke division, but it certainly can be. What's your favorite Brahmin that ever existed?
Well, I'm extremely biased, and everybody that knows me knows my answer is going to be Elmo. And I've gotten to be around a lot of the breed greats, and I've gotten to take part in using some of them. And to me, there was just never a bull that checked all the boxes. He didn't quite get the color part right, but we used that to our advantage, and he's produced a lot of phenomenal red cattle as well as gray. But everything else that was rooted in practical production and fertility and soundness and disposition and all of that, he just really, really checked all the boxes for me. So I'm gonna be, like I said, a little bit biased on that, but all things considered, I don't think I can vote for anybody else.
Well, I appreciate your sentiment there, because I think that's not biased at all that you would pick Elmo. He would probably, I said earlier in the podcast, he would make my Mount Rushmore. So he'd be one of my 4 most influential bulls of all time. And that's me being unbiased. And I think he's probably a lot of people's choice. But, well, John, I guess here's the opportunity. If you've got any last things to say to some of the people that are listening, or maybe your family that might be listening, here's a good time to go ahead and do it. But I appreciate you for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. And I think people are going to really enjoy hearing some of your talk on history, but more importantly, your just real world kind of mindset and understanding profitability at its most basic sense.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I guess um, I'm gonna give a shameless plug a little bit for JD Hudgens Inc. and what we have to offer in the marketplace, if that's okay. I would say that there's a lot of people with a misconception that the value on our cattle is impractical, or that we don't deal with certain people and this and that. But we generally at all times have cattle here for anybody's budget, for anybody's desire, and we sell to everybody, and we love new customers. And so I would just say that if you're in the market for a Brahmin, come give us a chance, and we'd love to show you what we have to offer.
Absolutely. Well, John, it's been a pleasure of mine to get the opportunity to interview. Like I said, hope you didn't feel slighted like you were getting the B team, but you were my choice of the entire list. So I appreciate you for joining in.
Well, I appreciate that, Keaton. It's been fun, and I just can't thank you enough for having me on here, and it's great getting to share some of my opinions.
Thank you, John.
Hey guys, we hope that you're enjoying the Over the Hump podcast. We've had so many great reviews and great feedback from this podcast, and we've had several people asking how they can support it. So we are proud to announce that we've created the Over the Hump fan club, where you can join and sign up on a yearly basis to help support this podcast and get some really cool merch as well. We have 3 different levels ranging from $40 a year to $250 a year. And at each level, you get some really cool different benefits and different free gifts. For example, at our Trailblazer level, you get a free copy of my really awesome Modern Brahmin coffee table book, which is a 160-page coffee table book featuring the gorgeous photography of Carlos Guizora from Mexico, along with Brahmin history written by me. And then our Supreme Stockman level, which is $250 a year, includes that plus free access to the Brahmin Academy for 1 year. And at our Trailblazer and Supreme Stockman levels, you also get a discount to use in the BRC online store, which you can use for anything that's in the store, including semen, AI certificates, show cattle camp, event registrations, and more. So this is a really great opportunity, especially if you purchase a lot of semen or AI certificates from us. You can join the fan club and get some great discounts to use throughout the whole year. So if you like this podcast and want to help support it, you can sign up for the Over the Hump fan club at shopbrcutrer.com. That's shopbrcutrer.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you are enjoying it.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cottrell. See you next time on the Over the Hump Podcast.